bring Mitch Lawrence into the conversation as the NBA playoffs ramping back up tonight here on 97.3 ESPN. And Mitch, let's start with the Boston game last night because, a blowout down there. Washington finally pulls one of these out after they've had the lead in all of these games. But I feel like I'm watching that series and thinking, what's the difference? I'm not buying into either one of these teams.
Oh, you mean to play the Cavaliers?
Yeah.
Okay. I can see your point. I think we all think that too. But this is a good series because there's a lot of hatred and dislike, and we'll see if Kelly Oubre is suspended for Game 4 after he took what I thought was a cheap kind of pick from Kelly Olynyk. Then we had a little Kelly on Kelly crime where he got up and he charged and he knocked Olynyk down. I don't know. The word is probably not, but I think the league by now, with all the flare-ups between the two teams over the last couple of years and what happened last night, they'll probably send in their top enforcers in terms of officiating. Now, years ago, that would be Steve Javi and Joey Crawford. Now it could be Dan Crawford. We'll see on that. But this is what we thought we'd get out of the series. I think the disheartening thing for Celtic fans last night was they saw Isaiah Thomas go from an unbelievable, epic performance, his playoff signature moment, 53 points the other night, and they only had 13 last night, going from making 16 shots to 3 because Washington did such a great job loading up against him, forcing him with multiple defenders to get rid of the ball. Nobody from Boston stepped up. But on the other end, the Washington knew they were down 2-0, and they really brought a sense of urgency. And they didn't get great shooting from Beal, but Bojan Bogdanovic off the bench with 19 points was a big difference, and they outscored Boston. They doubled them in the paint. So it's a good series. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to scare Cleveland, really. But for right now, it's a real good series between these two teams.
Yeah, I know the story's been great. The Isaiah Thomas story, you've been covering the league a long time. I mean, he was unbelievable, that 52-point effort the other night. I mean, 25 of them in the fourth and overtime. That was a Herculean-like effort there. So it was a great story. He has been an inspiration to watch, but it's really still hard. I think you said before, it's hard to buy into a team where you've got him really leading the way. I mean, I think you said he's not Allen Iverson.
Right.
Has he elevated himself to Allen Iverson, though?
Well, he did that one night, and I caught a lot of grief from people in Boston because I went on the radio and said, I don't think he's is he a playoff superstar? A playoff star, meaning, a guy who can go out and every night give you not 53 points, but is going to deliver big moments. Guys like Duncan and Kobe Bryant and I'm not saying I told you so because Isaiah Thomas obviously had this huge night, the 53 points. But, when you saw a guy like Iverson take his team deep into the playoffs, was unstoppable. He put together some really great moments and led his team to the finals. I don't know if Isaiah Thomas can do that. I think the big problem for him is, it's not who he's surrounded with. He's going to have to get through Cleveland. Let's say they get by this round because it looks like Cleveland's on a sweep kind of a path to the conference finals. And, when Boston plays Cleveland, they just don't have enough horses. They don't have the firepower to deal with LeBron. They can't deal with LeBron. They can't deal with Kyrie. So great for Isaiah Thomas. He needs to have some more big playoff moments. Will he? It's possible. No guarantees. But even if they get by this round, who's waiting for him at the end.
Mitch, how about John Wall? Can he do that? Can he take his team to the finals? Is he that type of player? Is he on that level? Maybe not this year's finals, but somewhere down the road, the kind of player, could he elevate and take his team to the finals?
Good question. I mean, we saw a great closeout game from John in Atlanta to get him to this point. Game 6, he had 42 points. He outscored the Hawks by himself in the fourth quarter. You know what? I'm not going to put it past them. I mean, look, right now, in terms of the East, nobody's getting by LeBron. Nobody's on that level. LeBron's an all-time guy. He's an immortal. The numbers he's putting up against Toronto is just incredible at this age, this point of his career. So I think everybody's going to have to wait until LeBron either takes a step back or retires before we're going to be confident enough to say, yes, this is the guy who's going to take his team, fill in the blank, past LeBron James, because right now it doesn't look like the East has anybody who can do that.
Mitch Lawrence with us talking NBA playoffs. Do they have the making of a future NBA Finals team, the Wizards, or do they maybe need to make some changes? I know Mike's not buying into the Wizards right now.
No.
Do you think that they have the making, though, of a future NBA Finals team?
Well, it depends what kind of, depends what John does in these playoffs, John Wall, and in the future. And, Bradley Beal has struggled in this series. He had a nice series against Atlanta, shot it well, but here he's facing better perimeter defenders. Boston has a legion of guys who can guard him, and he's really struggled here. To get to a finals, you usually have to have a transcendent star and then enough in the supporting cast. I don't think Washington is that team. Otto Porter's their third guy. No, I think they're a cut below, maybe a couple cuts below, because it starts out with, who's your number one player? And right now, I don't think John Wall is the transcendent superstar that usually need to get to a finals. I know Detroit back in 2004 had a collection of guys, but they had some big-time players too, like Billups and Rick Hamilton and Rasheed Wallace. They're a better team in my mind than these Wizards. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They got the 2 straight finals, and they were minutes away from going back-to-back champions under Larry Brown. So I think Washington's a few steps removed from that point. I think I'm pretty safe in saying that.
What about the idea of a super team loading up in the Eastern Conference, like the Wizards acquiring another star, or maybe the Celtics using that Nets pick to get a Jimmy Butler, or Pat Riley maneuvering to get stars to come south again, like a super team that could threaten the Cavs?
We're all waiting for it. The problem is the gap between Cleveland, Toronto, and Cleveland and Boston, and Cleveland and Washington is so big. Look, Boston, let's say they get a Gordon Hayward. Let's say they get Gordon Hayward and they bring in a Jimmy Butler too. They sign one, trade for another to match with to pair with Isaiah Thomas. You know what? They'll be a lot better. Will they be as good as Cleveland? That remains to be seen. Guys, we're talking about LeBron James, who's been to 7 straight finals. He's gone to 7 out of the East, and he's won 3 titles. And Kyrie Irving, who himself is a tremendous late-game player who's won a ring. And the third option is Kevin Love. You got to look at some of these teams. For some of these teams, Kevin Love might be the top option, if not the second option. So, we're all waiting to see if anybody wants to come east. Kevin Durant had a chance to come east last year, and he turned it down. If you put him on Boston, they'd be a lot better off than they are now. So we'll see on that. I don't think it's not like people are running east to come here. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe they're scared to take on LeBron. Maybe like Kevin Durant, he found himself, I can go join a proven championship team in Golden State and try to win out there. So we'll see what happens. It's not just the free agents, but you got to remember, too, Philadelphia has a couple of top young players from the draft who have been injured, and Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. The best player taken out of a draft recently is Karl Anthony Towns, and he went west. He's drafted by the Timberwolves. So sometimes it's not just the free agents, but what players are coming out of the draft who can make an immediate impact in the East. Who's the last really great player out of the draft to come East? And, they're really, I'm not going to anoint Porzingis. I'm not going to, Joel Embiid's played 31 games, so we got to get some talent shifting here to the East somehow.
Sure do, and I guess the question then would be, so how many more years does Cleveland sit on top of the East? When does the gap close in the East?
Well, when is LeBron going to slow down? That's the whole thing. The issue is LeBron's indestructible. The guy doesn't get hurt. Now he takes off 8 regular season games. You see why now, because he's fresh as a daisy. Dwayne Casey's probably looking at Toronto. He's got his Toronto team. Lowry's hurt. He may not play tonight. We'll see. He's got back issues anyway. DeRozan can't shoot against the Cavaliers. And, oh, by the way, LeBron James is putting up these historic numbers against the Raptors with no sign of slowing up. That's the amazing thing about LeBron. He's still playing these playoff games like he's in his prime, not like he's 32 years old. So that's the big unknown, really, is when is LeBron going to start slowing down and showing some mortality, some signs of slowing down and aging a little bit and maybe getting nicked up. I don't know. You know what? I don't think anybody in the East knows either.
You got that right. When does this guy slow down? This might be the best LeBron we've seen, this version. I know he's been great, but there was a lot of times in the past where those Miami teams, there were nights where, we'd be criticizing him the next day because he didn't want to take the shot or he didn't take the shot or yada, yada. Now it seems that now he's indestructible in terms of criticism. There's nothing left.
Right. He only gets criticized when he spins the ball around before draining a three.
Or maybe grabbing that guy's beer in the front row, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's having a good. I mean, that's the thing to me is that he knows they're in such a good spot that they're kind of toying with Toronto.
Right.
It's a big. It's the big question now is Golden State's got their team set up for the next few years. LeBron doesn't look like he's slowing down. It looks like they're on a collision course to be the first finals ever 3 years in a row. Golden State, Cleveland. This would be the rubber match. We're all kind of hoping, and really, it would be a shock. First of all, who's going to lose first between these two teams in these playoffs, let alone, we're all forecasting they're going to get to the finals. That's no problem. They haven't even lost a game yet. So, no, LeBron has been as good as advertised. And the thing is that he figured out how to win. The experience in Miami, losing to Dallas, the way they lost that, and he came under a lot of fire and a lot of criticism after that series. They're up 2-1, and he had some really awful fourth-quarter moments. He came under criticism with that. He's figured out how to win. He's learned how to win. He's got a great supporting cast around him, and so everything right now is set for him to keep going to the finals as long as he can stay upright.
Hey, Mitch, what happens to this Toronto team? It looks like they might be out soon, and this team's been together a couple of years. What's next for them?
Well, they got to figure out what they're going to do with Kyle Lowry. Everybody's, you hear people talking about, well, they can't win with Lowry. Lowry, is playing with a back deal, and now he's got this ankle. They've been to a conference finals with him last year. The unfortunate thing for any team in the East is you don't want to play Cleveland until the last round in the East. That's when you'll get your walking papers. They don't. The problem that I have with Toronto, and I owe the Indiana Pacers of 2013-14 an apology because I kind of looked at Toronto and I said, what, they're a lot like that team, that they just don't have enough to get by Cleveland. But I'll tell you what, that Pacer team had a lot more fight in it than this Raptor team. That Pacer team made LeBron sweat. When they went to a back-to-back conference finals, took them to 7 games. I mean, that was a really good Indiana team, and dare I say, much better than this Toronto team when it came to having a lot of toughness and resiliency. I mean, it's amazing how this team gets manhandled in Cleveland, Toronto. They've lost, all these games in Cleveland by, average of 24 points. Now, having said that, we know Cleveland struggled in Toronto. But, again, if Kyle Lowry doesn't play or if he's gimping around out there, that's going to be hard for Toronto. I don't know where they go. I mean, look, in a lot of ways it reminds me of any team that went up against the Jordan teams of the 90s. You were in the Eastern Conference. You would try to make changes. You try to get better. But you knew you just couldn't get by Jordan. The Knicks had that problem. The Knicks lost to Michael Jordan 5 or 6 times in the playoffs over, a 10 or 11-year span. And, I mean, they could never get Ewing the right help. But you know what? They weren't alone. Cleveland had problems getting by Jordan. I mean, everybody had trouble in the East getting by Michael Jordan in the 90s. So what do you try to do? You try to help your team. But, the problem there in Toronto is they got to make a decision on Lowry. They have to make a decision on Serge Ibaka, what they're going to do with him. Gave away a number 1 pick in Terrence Ross for him, and he's a free agent. So there's some big changes. Do they change coaches? Is Dwayne Casey okay? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the thinking is up there. On my radio show earlier today, there were people who were already complaining Dwayne Casey's not the guy, and you need another coach to get him to the next level. Against LeBron James, I don't know if you can even hire a guy who's going to take that team to the next level because it's an on-court roster issue and a superstar issue. They have a certain type of superstar versus your superstars. A coach wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah, and that is Mitch Lawrence with a Sirius XM NBA radio. That right there is the discussion, really, that I find to be interesting is, all right, what did they pay DeRozan? $139 million. And you make that signing, Mitch, knowing you're not good enough. So I'm spending $139 million knowing I do not have the talent to win. And I think that is where it really goes, to this whole thing of these teams trying to do it in different ways because I can't win with DeMar DeRozan as my best player. It's not possible, right?
Well, you have to look at it from Toronto's standpoint, guys. They never got out of the first round, basically, until last year with this crew. And so they're going to, they are not willing to say, well, we can't, finish in the – we can't get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, everybody wants to win the title. But sometimes you have to be a realist when you're building a team and you're saying, well, you know what, we're going to give it our all with these guys, even knowing that Cleveland has LeBron James, because what are you going to do, blow up your team and go to the bottom? It is really hard once you start blowing up your team to get back. It is the hardest thing to do because then you're talking about how does Toronto get talent? Who's the free agents that Toronto can sign other than a DeMar Carroll? Is a Kevin Durant going to go there? So it's hard to get star players. Then you have to hit on lotteries. Then you see, you know what, some of their best players like Tracy McGrady left after 3 years or Chris Bosh left after 7 years. For a market like Toronto, which hasn't had a lot of success, yeah, you might not win the title, but you might be, I guess maybe satisfied. You might be okay with like finishing in the top 4 in the NBA a couple of years in a row. It's not the worst thing in the world. Think of the alternative.
Right.
Think of what Jeff do. I mean, it's a whole different world. Believe me.
Well, it sounds like
city.
what you are suggesting is that fans need to change their expectations of you want to win the championship as opposed to having a successful season is maybe what you should be more inclined to be cheering for.
You know, I think, look, they haven't had really any success in Toronto if you look at their 20, 25 years in the league, have they? They've been, they get back to the conference finals last year. For the longest time with this crew, they couldn't get out of the first round.
Mm-hmm.
So they've made progress, but obviously you're missing the number one piece but everybody's missing that piece. I mean, look, LeBron could take, let's say they play in the finals. Who's to say they can't beat Golden State again this year? So if you're Toronto, you're thinking, you know what? Compared to where we've been historically, this isn't a bad spot.
Mitch Lawrence, Forbes has a new piece up. I want to real quick touch on the West because Tony Parker being out. How has that changed the dynamics of what we think about the Western Conference now?
Remember how the Celtics parlayed the Rondo loss into advancing to the next round?
Yeah. This
is a similar type of injury. First of all, Tony Parker, you probably saw the last of him. This quad tendon deal that he ripped that needs surgery, this KO'd Dikembe Mutombo, this KO'd Charles Barkley. I'm talking about when they were older and they were done, when they had these injuries. This particular tendon, this is everything to do with jumping an explosion, okay? So you're asking a guy who's 35 on the downside of his career anyway to come back from that. That's probably spells the end for Tony Parker. He's been a tremendous player, he's a finals MVP. He's been, he's like 9th overall in terms of scoring in the playoffs and 4th overall in played games and on and on and on. And he's huge for the Spurs. I mean, he's had a really good playoff run. That's the crazy thing. He played well against Memphis. He played well in one of these games here against Houston. And now you're asking Patty Mills or DeJounte Murray to be the guy who's going to run the offense. Now they're going into Houston. So this is a situation where they got to win on the road. Who does Popovich start? I have no idea because he's very hard to predict. Sometimes when Tony Parker was hurt this year, he's out for 17, 18 games, I think. Sometimes he had Patty Mills playing, sometimes he had starting, sometimes he had Murray starting. But make no doubt, I mean, this is to me a crippling blow for the Spurs. It'll probably ensure Houston getting out of this round at least, maybe even getting out of here in maybe 5-6 games instead of or 6-7. Maybe they don't have to play a game 7.
Wow.
Maybe they can win the next 3 or 4 or 3 in a row and go from there because Tony Parker means that much to the Spurs. I mean, this is to me a series-altering injury, just like we saw in the Rondo with the Bulls.
Powerful stuff. Mitch Lawrence here from Forbes. Go ahead, Pete.
Mitch, could that Tony Parker injury open the door this summer? Maybe somebody like Chris Paul leaving L.A. and going to San Antonio?
I don't think so because they'd have to gut their roster to get him in. They've already paid Kawhi a lot of money. They've paid LaMarcus Aldridge a lot of money. People are talking about Derrick Rose. He is not a Spur. He don't think like a Spurs. One of the great things when Greg Popovich talks about what they look for in players, they always talk about, A, can you play the game? B, can you accept the role? And C, are you happy with your teammates' success? That's a very important thing in Spurs culture. Derrick Rose is not a Spur. I'll tell you who would be a Spur. Now, I don't think they're going to have enough money for him, but Greg Popovich loves George Hill. He had George Hill. He drafted George Hill out of IUPUI in 2008, had him for 3 years, and then traded him for the rights to Kawhi Leonard, if you remember that. And to this day, he is one of Greg Popovich's favorite all-time players, believe it or not. But George Hill turned down $80 million from the Jazz. He thinks he's going to make a huge score in free agency. If it wasn't a question of money, George Hill would be perfect. He's 31 years old. Pop loves him. He loves the Spurs, and on and on and on. But, we'll see about that. But obviously they have to do something about that backcourt, guys, because it looks like it's the end for Tony Parker.
All right, we're talking with Mitch Lawrence over at Forbes.com right now. He's got some landing spots. We're talking about guys that could change teams. That Clippers team, everyone's going to have their eye on him, Mitch. Blake Griffin, the former number 1 overall pick. He's had a very injury-riddled, up-and-down career. But, Doc the other day said legacy for those guys. Do we see them together, or do we think Blake Griffin ends up someplace else?
Well, I know Doc's making noises about bringing everybody back. I reported, and I think other people have too, it looks like Chris Paul's already got a deal pretty much in place to stay there, to be north of $200 million. And, when people complain about Chris Paul, and he did have an awful Game 7 the other day, the closeout game against Utah, you got to remember, point guard is your number 1 position. It's the premium position in the NBA. If you decide Chris Paul is going to leave, what's your plan if you're the Clippers? And, he's still an elite playmaker. No, his playoff record is pretty bad. I mean, they haven't gone anywhere. They've never gotten out of the second round. So you're going to stay with him. Now, Blake Griffin's interesting because this playoff series and the one last year, he wasn't around to finish. He was hurt. He was off to the side. He was injured. You're going to pony up about $180 million for Blake Griffin, not knowing if that quad's going to go. He's had quad problems. He breaks down. He's had this toe thing now. This is a huge, huge consideration. I argue in my Forbes piece that I did Sunday night after they lost it. You got a few teams that might be interested, including the Knicks, including a team like Oklahoma City. He played at OU as a collegian, including a team like Denver. Denver has been trying to trade for him the last couple of years. Who knows, maybe Indiana or Boston. But go back to the Knicks for a second. An injury-riddled guy or a guy who is coming off an injury or looks like he's a little brittle. The Knicks once paid $100 million and fully guaranteed the 5-year deal for Amari Stoudemire, knowing his knee was eventually going to go. They love the big names here up on the Garden Marquee. You got Carmelo Anthony, who's friends with Chris Paul. There's talk about that. Would he waive the no-trade clause to become a Clipper? There's also talk that the Clippers re-sign everybody and still make a run at Carmelo using guys like J.J. Redick. So we'll see on that. I think Griffin might be in play. I think, Doc has to come out and basically tell you right now that it's a legacy thing and everybody needs to stay. But that's a bad chemistry team, and they need a lot. They need to revamp themselves, and Blake Griffin might be a guy who helps them get, who knows, maybe they can get a Paul George. Who knows, maybe they can get a player or two. But I think some teams obviously would be leery of him because of the injury deal. There's no question about that.
Check out the 5 possible landing spots for Blake Griffin. Mitch Lawrence has it at Forbes.com. Follow him on Twitter at Mitch_Lawrence. We got NBA playoffs continuing tonight on 97.3 ESPN, and you can listen to Mitch on the radio at Sirius XM's NBA Radio, which I am a frequent listener to. Mitch, we appreciate the time as always, pal. Have a great weekend.
Tune in tomorrow from 7 to 10. We're going to talk about all the two great games tonight. All right, guys?